I'll just tell a little story about cropping right to farm issue in Scotland that I experienced many years ago and follow with a question out of it. I was visiting a beautiful farm and a very innovative farmer who was participating in some of the first trials of GM canola. And this was 20 years ago. It was way back in the early days. And he had all the Greenpeace protesters come into the farm one night, all suited up in the biohazard suits and everything, and knocked down all the crop, and it was all over the national news and everything. But the field was two halves, because it was a split field trial, and half of it was GM canola and half of it was conventional canola. And they came in and, of course, knocked all the conventional canola down. And if they'd have known the first thing about the technology, they would have known what was the GM canola, because the GM canola had not a weed in it because it had been sprayed. The conventional canola was full of weeds and so on. So there is that irrationality that we deal with in a lot of this debate in terms of the understanding of the consumer and the activist about the science that's involved in farming. And I'm just wondering, a comment from all of you about how hard it is to deal with that in terms of having a rational debate when you're dealing with irrational people who really don't talk in facts or are prepared to believe facts.
I have a good comment on that one. In my case, it's animal activists who, there's no point arguing with them. They're preaching mostly to the monkey pit, and so you just leave them to the monkey pit and hope they don't convert too many others over.
I guess in our case, to be honest, we probably had animal welfare groups, the RSPCA, the EPA has actually done two inspections on our farm in the last 4 years, one about 2 weeks ago, and on both cases they did a 33-point check and ticked the box that no further action was required. So in our case, we haven't basically done anything wrong, but it did. I hate the show, and I think it's been comments about it before, but Matthew Evans, that was on television with his show recently, and he was in Federation Square in Melbourne, and he had the pig suit there and people getting in it and getting inside the farrowing stall and saying, how much room have you got to move in there, and these pigs are in there for months at a time, and they were saying, it's shocking. He said, well, the other choice is that they lay on and kill their offspring. Now what do you think? And every one of them said, that's the lesser of two evils, and now I understand the reason that it's done, and it's important to save the offspring. And maybe, from a farmer's point of view, I thought afterwards, maybe from a farmer's point of view, we're actually fighting this the wrong way. Mulesing sheep, I hate it. But I hate it worse when I see maggots crawling around in the sheep meat while they're walking around the paddock. I hate dehorning, but I've seen the results of animals that get together and they're not dehorned, and that's awful. So maybe there's some thought that should be given to saying, okay, farmers do this. It's not pretty, they don't like it, but this is the alternative. Which one do you choose? And okay, you can have the vegans come out and say, well, you don't eat, you don't do that, but maybe it's a different track that we should be looking at in the future.
David's right, that I do a lot of talking around the place to people, and when they actually understand the facts, most people are quite reasonable. There's a bunch over here that you're never ever going to make any difference to, and the first thing you have to learn is don't feed the trolls. If they're over there in that sector, you're never going to influence them. Don't waste your breath, because my grandmother used to have a saying, never wrestle with a pig in mud because you both get dirty and only the pig enjoys it. Now, all you're doing is spinning it and spinning it. What I think we really need to do is to look at how we influence people where they understand it, and it's by conversations like these, one-on-one with people that spread, with people that can listen. So my rules, don't feed the trolls, but talk to anybody who'll listen and tell them those stories.
Okay, we've got some questions out there. Yep.
Thank you all. I'm Mitchell Isaacs from New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, and it's coming up on the 1 year anniversary of the New South Wales Government's Right to Farm policy. we don't see it as something, you know, we put in place almost a year ago, now it's done and dusted, we can move on. It's something that we need to understand and learn from people such as yourselves and the people in this room as to how we can continually improve the conditions and make sure that the right to farm or people can undertake their businesses without interference. Now, I'll just go back to a couple of things that Jan, you said. One was that we need to recognise the changing face of agriculture, and there are changes, there are innovations, and also something about the need to get some consistency. And it's something that as government we do grapple with, is the balance between certainty by having really good, strong rules and legislation and that sort of thing, but also flexibility to make sure that we don't do something that will be really difficult to work with or stifle future innovation that we haven't seen coming. I'm just wondering if you have any comment or suggestions on how government and regulators might be able to deal with that balance between certainty and flexibility.
Get out of the way. Most of the time it's get out of the way. If we had a robust definition of an agricultural zone that encompassed wording along the lines of accepted practice or best practice or recognised innovation, then government shouldn't need to get involved. I remember many years ago, New South Wales Agriculture had a brain explosion and they decided that they were going to... No, I take that back, that was wrong. The New South Wales government had a brain explosion and they were going to require farmers to have a development application for change of use. And somebody bright spark within the EPA at the time decided change of use was change of crop or change of animal activity. And the DPI were the unfortunate recipients of 7,000 million applications for change of use that could never be processed in real life. What you've got to do is accept that this is agriculture and it will change. But if it's clearly designed to produce an end agricultural product, that's all the government needs to know, to give us the flexibility within that zoning to be able to do that.
I might go a little bit harder than that, in fact, to say that I don't mind what the regulations are, as long as the regulations are set down and don't change. You know, the situation with this Victorian government with their last release only a couple of weeks ago is saying that we're going to hand the legislation, they're backing away, the government's backing away from the argument and saying we're going to hand the decision to each individual shire. Now, we've just been through the situation where we ticked every box, and also in the legislation they're saying they're giving the EPA more power. Well, again, we've ticked every box with the EPA, but still we lost our right to farm. So to be honest, I want the regulations put in there, and they can be whatever they want to put in there from a government point of view, just as long as that we have them, and we'll meet them. Not an issue. We just need to know what they are and they're firm.
There's a microphone coming.
Thank you. Byron Stein, also with New South Wales Department of Primary Industries. I'm involved in the poultry meat industry, and so it's an industry that certainly cops its fair share of land use conflict issues, particularly in Western Sydney, and there's one major processing company that's really under pressure. But I'm curious about whether you've had any experience in terms of the regulators and their ability to interpret the legislation in light of your particular business. I review development applications for poultry farms across New South Wales, and one of the things that's clear to me is that the regulators regulating your industries have very poor understanding of your industries, and therefore a very poor regulatory outcome. And I found that right from state government agencies, non-ag state government agencies, including the EPA, right through to local government. So we often try and insert ourselves in that space to try and sometimes educate and assist the regulators to interpret your business in light of a development application, for example. But have you found that as an issue and as a cost or burden to your business because the regulators don't fully understand what it is you do?
Yeah, I've absolutely had that situation. One with our council planner is from a very small shire, and she'd approved had experience with one intensive farm before that was a duck farm. So all the questions she asked me were about ducks. I asked her to come out and have a look, and she always postponed that. So, she didn't come out till after 6 months. So there was a huge knowledge gap there. And yes, the same with our regulators. The staff at the New South Wales EPA who are looking after me had no experience with pig farms. Our industry is really proactive, and we have a national environmental guidelines for pig farms. So it's like our Bible. This is what you have to do when you're building a pig farm. My first question was, why aren't you using the they asked me, why aren't you using the EPA irrigation manual? And I said, well, because I'm using this one. The EPA helped write this. And the staff looked at me blankly like, but we'd rather use the EPA one. So I had to fight for that, to use our own industry, guidebook. And it's so difficult, and back to the previous comment, in the first lot of information I provided a odour, level 1 odour assessment, which says that if there's no houses within this zone and it's calculated on pig numbers and effluent system and topography, if there's no houses within this zone, you're good. And if it's, if you pass, you don't have to do the next level. So that went into the EPA, and they said, we're just a bit worried about this. We'd like you to do the second level. So that means I get a consultant, $15,000. Do you know what the result was? Like, mine was a circle, and then theirs was a circle with a squiggly line. So $15,000 to get the same result. And then they said, some of the assumptions you've made in this, there's not enough data backing this up. So we had to come back and measure our odour on our existing farm, another $10,000. And I've just put that information in now, and I just think, what next? And there's no end. They can just keep asking and asking and asking. And I think in my case, they're too scared to make a decision, so they'll just keep asking and asking and asking.
Till you give up.
Maybe, yeah. Or till I take it to court, which is where I'm just about at this point.
Sorry, I'm just going to make one comment. That's interesting because I had a farm near where I am who's gone over the cap, so it now needs to be EPA licensed, and the EPA locally were asking him for quite obscene things unrelated to his business. He asked me to get involved. I asked the EPA why they were requiring these things, and they said because they simply don't understand the industry, and so they're throwing the book at him to cover their base. Now, I think that's costing agriculture money, and it's clearly not required. So it seems to me that the regulators need to have some skill in the area that they're regulating, because I think that'll lead to some efficiencies potentially.
It's actually one of the things that the Victorian government in their last report has said, that they're going to train and have available more staff at the local government level to help assess these areas. But, sort of come back to our situation again, we ticked every box, and people had plenty of time to do their reports, all the regulatory bodies, and they were all ticked. But then the council turned around and said, you're affecting the amenity of your neighbours.
There's a really good response to that. I sat on the steering committee that's developing this statewide plan for local government in Tasmania, and I was the only person with a rural background. And it became immediately apparent, and this is not unique, that when we were talking about the agriculture stuff, the planners in the room are all town planners. We don't want town planners planning for agriculture or for rural areas. It'd be really nice to have some rural planners. So yes, they need to train people up, but they need to make sure that they're trained up with the right skill set. So let's have town planners planning towns and rural planners planning things that aren't towns.
More questions? Yep. Dave?
Yeah, David Clark. Look, let's throw this out as a proposition and see what you think of it. Local governments should be mandated to have an agricultural plan the same way as they have a TAN plan or rating plan and what have you. I don't believe many rural councils actually have a clue about what agriculture is, have a vision of an understanding of the economic contribution that agriculture makes within their areas, particularly rural councils, But what do you think about the proposition that they be mandated to have an agricultural plan?
I'll come back to my comment previously, David. I think in theory that's a fabulous idea. In practice, the likelihood of it being developed by people who have no understanding of agriculture is what will be the reality. So theory's great, practice would be a disaster.
There is actually guidelines in Victoria and which sets down and it talks about what is intensive farming, and in it says the importation of the majority of your food needs an intensive farming permit. that's, you know, there isn't a dairy farmer in Victoria now that would pass to be able to run a dairy farm. You know, most dairy farms have outblocks where they run their heifers and they cut their hay and bring it back to their dairy. Also, they feed grain through the winter months and places like that in the bale. So, and then you start talking about, you know, everything else that goes along with what happens on a dairy farm, and again, affecting the amenity of the neighbours because they start their milking machines at 5 o'clock in the morning and on and on and on. So I'm hoping that it's just not going to be me jumping up and down about these last regulations, but the whole dairy industry in Victoria will. But there is rules in Victoria, but again, we passed all those and then it got turned around and says community expectations, you affect the amenity of the neighbour, and there's nothing at all written about that.
And I want to come back to the comment I made about the review of the right to farm rules in Tassie that's just been handed down and the incorporation into that of the PAL policy. When I rang to speak to the senior person doing this, he thought I was ringing to congratulate him. And I can assure you it was not a congratulatory phone call. He knew I'd spoken to him by the end of it, because he thought putting the PAL policy into the right to farm stuff was a great idea. And when I tried to explain to him about, well, hang on a minute, you've now just said that there is no soil, no farmland in Tasmania other than the absolute top of the highlands where they fish for trout, where you can have agricultural land because it's the only place left that's got those right soil types. And you've just ruled out all our irrigation. He said, oh, I didn't think about that. Duh. Just duh.
One more question, Holly.
Thank you, panellists. I think you're all amazing. Just a question, Jan. You mentioned about social licence, and I know, Edwina, you've been proactive on social media and have had incredible run-ins with people in that space. What is your message, I guess? What is the balance between interacting on social media and not? Do we ignore or are we active? And how does, I don't know, social licence moving forward, where do we, it's a horrible word, I agree with you, Jan, but where do we go?
Oh, geez, that's tough, isn't it? I hate to walk away from an argument, I really do. I know that will surprise some of you, particularly those who know me, but you know there's a point, and you saw that yourself, Edwina, where you know you're not going to get anywhere and you're just going back over the same ground. I've got to the point where I'll stop there. I'll talk to anybody who wants to talk to me, under wet cement with marbles in my mouth if necessary, but you're not going to win those people, and all you do is they just keep coming in and wedging you or becoming personal or doing stuff, and then I get upset and other people get upset and it becomes a fruitless exercise. Social media is a really important thing and we need to use it, but we need to use it carefully, and we need to recognise that there are people out there who are just horrific. And when things like happen to Edwina and David happen, that's totally unacceptable and we just need to back off.
My comment in that is I actually completely avoid social media because if my head pops up, that's what happens. Exactly. So I'm pretty, as tightly locked up as I can be on social media. But I think it's great when there's people out there being positive and putting positive farming stories out there, and I love that when that comes across my feed. But David's such a different story because he had such a positive social media.
We've, Jesus, touch wood, do it cross fingers and toes, like that picture that you showed of your. Now, somebody showed a picture today of somebody with and I don't think that we've had, other than just probably from 2 or 3 people locally that's just been in the local paper, which is not even online. So we've never had a bad comment. We've had unbelievable support for what we do, and my son was saying to me the other day, Dad, I've got 14,000 people, just hit 14,000 people following me on Instagram, and to be honest, I don't know whether that's a lot or not a lot, but it's a lot. Anyway, he said he's got just hit 14,000. I said, hey, get real, mate. You know, we had 130,000 support me on the petition. So, but, you know, we're lucky that we haven't had any bad social media, but I am shit scared of it. I don't know how you handle it when it gets bad. And, you know, those people that make those vile comments and things like that, you know, there's no reason to those people. And I think our reaction would be that you wouldn't even answer them because you just feed them.
If you could join me again in thanking three fantastic speakers for the last session.